Welcome back, everybody, for our last session of the day. Love the words preserving the email collection of 92Y's Uterberg Poetry Center. This presentation will be given by Sally DeBauche and Marian Clarke, and they are also one of the second round EABCC awardees, so we're looking forward to their presentation. Feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Ruby. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So thanks everyone for joining us for our session, and thank you to the symposium organizers. It's been such a fantastic event. I know I've learned a lot. And yeah, we will be discussing our project to preserve, process and preserve the email collection of the 92nd Street Y's Uterberg Poetry Center. I'm Sally DeBauche, and I'm a digital archivist at Stanford University. I've also been a member of the EPAD project since 2019, so I've had a focus on processing email collections. And I'll be presenting along with my co-project partner, Marian Clarke, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marian Clarke, and I'm the project archivist who is processing the email collections of the 92nd Street Y Uterberg Poetry Center.
So the 92nd Street Y is a community and cultural center located in Manhattan and home to the Uterberg Poetry Center, which is considered to be a preeminent place for writers to share their work with the public. They host a lively slate of author readings, writers' workshops, and the annual Discovery Poetry Contest. Bernard Schwartz, the director of the Poetry Center, contacted us at Stanford to discuss a collaborative project to process the email archives of the center's directors. These archives go back to the late 90s and discuss all aspects of the center's work. And in doing so, they really touch on the lives and the work of some of the 20th and 21st century's most notable writers. So Bernard was seeking assistance with some of the technical aspects of processing and preserving this large email archive comprised of over 1 million messages. And at Stanford Libraries, we recognized early on the importance of preserving and making accessible archival email collections, developing the workflows and even the software itself, EPAD, to make this work possible. And we really felt that this project represented an opportunity not just to make this fascinating and valuable email collection accessible to stakeholders and preserving it for the future, but also to explore models for doing this kind of digital archival work collaboratively with small cultural heritage institutions that otherwise would not be able to invest into the staff and infrastructure needed to do it. So the idea was that Stanford would provide the technical support for processing the email archives of the 92nd Street Y as both the donor and the primary user, most likely. And we're very grateful to receive funding for this project from the EABCC regranting program, which has primarily supported the hiring of a project archivist to process the collection. So that's Marian Clarke. She was hired in early 2022. And once she was on board, we began to plan how we would process this collection. But before we could process the collection, we needed to acquire the files from the 92nd Street Y and prepare them for processing. So we worked with IT staff from the 92nd Street Y to export the 8 email accounts from their file management system, which resulted in 78 PST files clocking in at 371 gigabytes of data. The 92nd Street Y transferred these files to us over a proprietary cloud storage site. I then moved them to our secure server, where I stored them temporarily as I converted them. As we plan to use EPAD to process this collection, I needed to first convert the files from the format we had received, which was PST, to MBOX, EPAD's target import format. If you caught our project update earlier this week from the EPAD Plus project, you know that you now don't need to go through this step, as you can actually convert files while importing them into EPAD with the Emailchemy integration. But at the time when we were doing this, that was not yet possible. So after successfully converting the files using email can be separately, I moved on to transferring them to Marian. And this is where we started to hit a few bumps in our project. So my first attempt to transfer the files was to load them onto a hard drive, encrypt the hard drive, and then ship it to Marian. I live in the Bay Area. Marian lives in Panama. However, when Marian received it, she found that the hard drive was empty. And it seems that something had gone wrong when I was transferring the files to the hard drive and I missed it. So a lesson from me to you, always check your work before you ship it to another continent. But moving on to plan B, we decided to use Google Drive to transfer the files. Our institutional instance of Google Drive at Stanford is approved to store high-risk data, which we all know is very commonly found in email archives, but we wanted to take the additional step of encrypting the files before transferring them that way. So since we were both using Macs, I encrypted the files using the Mac disk utility, which is a pretty user-friendly tool that comes pre-installed on all Mac computers. This seemed like a good solution until we hit our next bump. So at the beginning of the project, Marian was using her personal MacBook Air to process the collection. However, upon beginning the process of importing the converted email files into ePad, it quickly became clear that that computer was just not up to the task. The computer's hard drive simply didn't have enough space to hold the original Mbox files and the resulting ePad packages. With only 8 gigs of RAM, the import process was creeping along at a frustratingly slow pace. So our solution was to use some funds from our grant award to purchase a new computer for Marian with more storage space and more RAM. We were moving in a positive direction until we hit our next bump. The email files that I had previously sent to Marian, I had encrypted with a tool that could only run on Mac. Marian was now working on a Dell that was running Windows. So the email files, I needed to move back a step and re-encrypt the files using a tool that would work for both of us. My first attempt was to encrypt the files using VeriCrypt. Many of you might be familiar with this tool. It has the advantage, it's a free free encryption tool with the advantage of being compatible with both Mac and Windows. We found that the learning curve to using VeriCrypt was a little bit steeper than the Mac disk utility. And the documentation that's available online didn't prove to be too helpful to us, unlike most of the other encryption tools that we've tried, where you basically point it at a file or folder and then encrypt that file or folder. With VeriCrypt, you first create a virtual container, encrypt that, and then add files. So it's a little bit of a different concept. I was able to successfully encrypt files using VeriCrypt, but on her end, Marian ran into some issues when trying to actually decrypt them. We tried to troubleshoot this, referencing various YouTube tutorials, Reddit forums, anything we could find. But we were unsuccessful and still not quite sure what the problem really was. This tool seems like a great option with a lot of potential. Maybe somebody out there could teach us how to use it. Unfortunately, it was not a fit for this project. So we moved on to another tool that I was already familiar with called 7-Zip, which is a free open source file archiver. It has the disadvantage of only working with Windows, which meant that I could only use it on one of the Windows workstations at our office, and I work from home 3 days a week. So it wasn't quite as convenient, but the tool itself worked well. 7-Zip isn't necessarily advertised as an encryption tool, but you do have the option to encrypt your files as you compress them using an AES 256 encryption format. And actually encrypting and compressing the files at the same time made them faster to upload and download from Google Drive, which was an unplanned but very welcome benefit. So after a long, frustrating, often humbling road, Marian now had the files in her possession in a format that she could import into ePad, and we were finally ready to move on to actually processing the collection. So to talk about that, I'll pass it over to Marian.
So initially we tried to ingest the large accounts first. but quickly encountered a deluge of technical issues as a result of the sheer size of it. After several attempts, failures, and technological upgrades, as Sally mentioned, we realized that my MacBook Air couldn't handle the size of some of the collections, so we moved over to a Dell with more memory and RAM. We decided that it would be beneficial to begin ingesting and processing the smaller, more manageable accounts first. This was a turning point for us. Not only did it allow the project to gain momentum, which created a sense of accomplishment and confidence, but it created a roadmap for processing. It fostered a familiarity with ePad that was easier to generate when working with smaller amounts of data, a bit like learning to swim in a pool before getting into the ocean. The larger accounts require multiple accessions, so we made the decision to ingest 5 files at a time, and many of these contain between 100 and 200,000 messages. We used ePad to process these email accounts, and while ePad itself helps a great deal with the processing, an archivist is still necessary to cull through the information, identify false positives, messages for restriction, to consolidate correspondence, and check image attachments. So we began by surveying each director's account as they differed dramatically based on length of tenure at the Poetry Center, as well as when email was adopted as a tool for professional communication during their tenure. So I created a video to demonstrate our approach to processing and also a demonstration of the potential ways the collection can be used to trace a literary figure. So Sally, if you don't mind.
Here we are in ePad's processing module. And we are going to go into Alexandra Wilder's archive in order to demonstrate our approach to processing. Here we have the front matter. After we ingest an account, we start processing by consulting ePad's sensitive lexicon, located here, and surveying messages that may need to be restricted. ePad flags messages that contain words related to personally identifiable information like social security numbers or passport numbers, health, employment, drug use, as well as anything pertaining to financial, criminal, and legal issues. There's also personal issues as well, mostly related to family. Some of the messages identified by ePad might be false positives, but the lexicon allows for a more focused and economical inspection of messages that may contain potentially confidential information. We also use an email appraisal document that's created for each account. It contains various search terms for potentially sensitive information. Basically, we try to come up with the terms that ePad might not have picked up on, although ePad does a very thorough job. It also tracks key correspondence that appear with the sensitive information and the number of messages that appear as well. After I've sorted through the flagged messages, I create labels for the ones that do contain sensitive information. And as you can see here, the numbers are a little different than what ePad had flagged. And the labels will restrict this information. So these messages will not be going into the discovery or the delivery module, those are the modules that researchers will interact with. Next, we begin to clean up correspondence. As you can see here, this one has been cleaned up. In the case of email, people may go by their full formal names, abbreviated versions of their names, nicknames, initials, or change their names entirely. Their contact information and corresponding names may be spread throughout the list of correspondence multiple times. Many people also have multiple email accounts that they use regularly. This proliferation of names and contacts makes for a messy and confusing experience for researchers. Fortunately, ePad allows the archivist to edit the address book to aggregate names and contacts when appropriate. This process can be time-consuming, but it's the beginning in terms of consolidating correspondent names, and it makes using the collection much easier and more efficient. Many of the accounts in this collection for 92nd Street Y contain close to and some well over 10,000 correspondents. So with our timeline in mind, we decided to consolidate 100 of the most frequently messaged correspondence. For our final processing step, we check image attachments to screen for sensitive visual content, missing images, or errors. ePad pulls the images out of the original email and makes them accessible and viewable by year. So this step is fairly easy. After we have conducted this general processing on all of the accounts, we might go back in, depending on time and need, and process on a much more granular level. So I thought it might be interesting to go into the delivery module. So this, again, is what researchers will see. These are the processed collections. So you'll notice that Bernard Schwartz is not fully processed yet, so is not in the delivery module. So I wanted to trace a literary figure throughout the collections just to see what that might look like or how one might use this for research. So we'll go back into Alexandra's. The literary figure that I thought we would follow is Billy Collins, who is a poet and someone who is a frequent guest and contributor to the 92nd Street Y. So we'll do an advanced search because we want the emails that he's corresponding in and not necessarily emails about him or planning emails. So here you can see in Alexandra's collection, there's 23 emails between her and Billy Collins. We'll go into Betsy's collection. And in Betsy's collection, there's 20 emails between her and Billy Collins. One of the things that's unique about the 92nd Street Y collections is that there isn't a lot of overlap. overlap in messages because people were CC'd on things, because people continued corresponding after their tenure, or people changed positions within the organization. So here, there's only 4. Go into Janet Pallotta's collection. And there are 4 messages in Janet's collection from Billy Collins. We'll skip Carl Kirchway because I know for a fact that there are no messages between him and Billy Collins. And that is because his tenure as director predates Billy's relationship with the 92nd Street Y. And in Victoria Rowan's collection, there are 35 messages. So this is just one way that a researcher could use these collections and what might be of interest to people.
Okay.
So our processing status update is that the smallest collections have all been processed, and we are still working on the 2 largest, Ricardo Maldonado and Bernard Schwartz. Both of their collections span almost the entire time that the 92nd Street Y has used email for communication. So you can see they're substantially larger than the smaller accounts. It's also interesting to see how the use of email changes over the years. So Carl Kirchway's, whose account is very small, his use of email was primarily outside of the institution, and his email style reflects this kind of the time of when it was adopted, right? It was the late 90s. The way he emails, there's a formality like letter writing, and his paragraphs are rich in detail and personality. He tells stories and reflects on memories. And he also maintained a relationship with the Y after leaving there and often helped coordinate bringing in authors. David Yezi also used his email with more formality and lots of rich detail contained in paragraphs with very much attention to grammar. As email became used more and more frequently, especially for internal communications, the messages became shorter and more casual, often filled with jokes between coworkers. And certain writers like Billy Collins also became more casual and chummy in their emails back and forth with the Y. Next slide. So for project outreach, Sally and I have collaborated on a case study for the project, which is available for reading at the SAA blog. And we're working on another post for the blog, the SAA blog, this time focusing on processing.
So as another part of our project, we also want to provide a platform for archivists, scholars, and even email donors to gather and discuss the challenges and opportunities of collecting email archives, and how they can be used as primary source research material. So this will be a one-day entirely virtual event to facilitate the widest possible participation, and will take place during the first week of December 2023, coinciding with the culmination of our grant project. And given the 92nd Street Y's position in the literary world, we'll put a particular focus on email archives of literary figures and organizations to explore the themes and workflows that are particular to these kinds of collections. We'll feature discussions between email donors and scholars who use their collections in their research, use cases presented by archivists who work with literary email archives, and of course, we'll share the final report from the conclusion of our email processing project. We'll share more details about this event and information about how to attend towards the end of summer. And finally, we'll leave you with this quote from author Zadie Smith in her essay, Life Writing, where she concludes that her email account is probably the most real, in her words, document of her life. Email is not only the modern form of correspondence, it documents life in a much more comprehensive way. And this quote really speaks to the importance of the work that we've all been discussing over the course of this symposium, finding the technical solutions to preserve and provide access to email, and the policies that will allow us to do so while protecting the personal information found within email collections is what will allow us to make these incredibly rich sources of information accessible into the future. So with that, we thank you for joining us, and happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Sally and Marian. In thinking about your presentation, are you hoping, or let me see how to phrase this, that more cultural institutions, you would be able to partner with more cultural institutions based on this project?
I think we're hoping to provide something of a first pass at trying to figure out a good model for doing that kind of work. So, whoever might be interested in doing it, to find good ways to partner and get this work done for institutions that don't have the staff or the technical experience to do it, but have the need to do it.
Just a friendly reminder to everyone, you can feel free to ask questions directly by raising your hand, and we'll go ahead and unmute you. So our first question is, do these email accounts still live on the original servers too?
They do still live on the 92nd Street Y server, because a number of them are still active. So even some of the former directors who aren't currently the directors, like Marian mentioned, still have a role in the organization or are affiliated to some degree, and so they may still use those accounts. So they're ongoing, and we've talked to Bernard Schwartz, the director, about keeping in mind that there might need to be subsequent accruals of email from those accounts in the future too.
Forgive me if you've mentioned this, but did you have any, I know that you mentioned Bernard, and was there any kind of reluctance that you faced with other active email archiving, email that you were archiving from active accounts, Or was everybody gung-ho about it?
Well, we primarily, it's with Bernard that everything is going through, right? And he's been very enthusiastic about everything. And I know he contacted Sally initially. And so, yeah, he's been very, very open. Nobody's been very reluctant.
That is great.
Hi, Sally and Marian. Chris here. Really great presentation. It's a great project, as I thought from the beginning. The wonderful partnership between the 92Y and Stanford. I guess my question is, thinking about how the project's going and the work that you've put in, obviously a lot of really, really fine-grained, detailed processing work, and just excellent use of ePad there. But I'm wondering if you think of, would the overall model be applicable for other institutions as well, perhaps where they don't have a dedicated email archiving program? Not to say that Stanford would necessarily lead all of those, because that's obviously pretty difficult for one institution or even a group of institutions to take on. But could you reflect a little bit on the partnership model that you developed?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been very successful. I think there was a fair amount of, technical troubleshooting, which we talked about, that sort of once you've gotten that out of the way and you found a good system for working remotely, all dispersed like we have been, I think subsequent projects like this would be a pretty low barrier. Once we moved on from that technical issue, Marian and I basically meet once a week. We consult about what Marian is working on, any questions that she has about the collection. But overall, since apart from that sort of technical troubleshooting, I would say our investment of time has been fairly minimal. And a lot of that is down to Marian being very such an independent person and really motivated to figure this stuff out and really interested in the project. But I think it's potentially a pretty sustainable model. We hope to publish the guidelines that we were sort of developing around how to transfer data and how to manage a project like this in a way that other people could reuse it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Interesting reflection. One of the other projects that I'm involved with, although quite on the fringes of it or tangentially, but I'm an advisor on the Data Curation Network board. And the Data Curation Network, although it's mainly larger research institutions, has this model set up where all the institutions that contribute can get some assistance from other people within the network. So say you have a data set to curate, that has a format that you're not able to deal with, or it's in a topical area that you don't understand fully the metadata requirements, you can get some assistance from one of the other people. And Illinois could get help from Cornell or whatever. I'm just wondering if there's, potentially a model there for us to think about in the email archiving community, knowing that it would be really great to expand out and have a network of people who are able to assist each other, based on the specific project needs that we might have. So no need to comment on that. It's more or less me just getting a little bit ahead of myself and thinking about potential next steps.
We do have a question in the Q&A from Aaron. Are there other digital materials you are collecting related to this organization, or do you have plans to do that in the future? And would you use the same sort of system that you've used for email?
So they actually have an archivist there. They're a media archivist. They started, they record all of their the lectures, the readings, all of that. That's being recorded, and so it was interesting actually in the going through emails, seeing when people realized in the early 2000s we need to start doing some archival planning and hiring an archivist for the institution. So they have a lot of material there on site.
Thank you, Marian. I guess if there are no remaining questions, we might transition early to some closing remarks from Chris Prom, if you're ready.
I think I'm ready, and I'll keep these relatively brief. I just first and foremost want to thank each and every one of you who are here, either online watching now or watched earlier and watching the video and the closing remarks here at the end. It's been wonderful for us, to see the EABCC project come forward, to see the results in the online symposium, which succeeded in numerical terms more than we ever could have hoped it could. It would have succeeded, with up to 300 people and never less than 100 online at any time here. So as I noted at the beginning, when I welcomed all of you, the EABCC project really did seek to catalyze research and move the community toward maturity. And we think the symposium was very helpful and useful in doing that. But we're also very, very interested in all of your perspectives. So I did want to let all of you know that accordingly, we will be sending out over email. And I think Ruby will also place into chat here a link to a post-symposium survey where you can share more with us, what resonated with you from the symposium, and perhaps things that we might also think about, if we were to offer it again. Also, just of course, like to reiterate that all of the presentation materials will be available through our website, and we will also post links to videos of each session afterwards. I'd like to also just very briefly note a particular word of thanks to all of our presenters. I certainly know that there's been no shortage of Zoom symposia and webinar during COVID, and that there's Zoom fatigue and all of that sets in. But I've been so impressed with the engagement, the leadership, the vitality of the presentations that were presented by everybody here. And I particularly like to thank people who came in from other time zones outside of the United States, our colleagues in France, in Austria and Australia, and I know I'm forgetting certainly the United Kingdom, and I know I'm forgetting other ones there as well. Also like to thank Eden for her behind the scenes leadership, technology management here, work on prepping the survey and all other kinds of ways that she's helped out. Even though she's been off camera, she's been a really essential presence here during our time, helping those digital gears to keep turning as effectively as they did. And I am, of course, particularly grateful to you, Ruby, for all of the excellent work that you did in planning, in organizing, in working out every kink along the way and getting an event like this together. I was reflecting a little bit on it. I've been through a lot of, been in a lot of Zoom sessions and Zoom webinars, and there's always kinks, and that's understandable. But seeing things here reminded me of an athlete performing sort of at very high level. Everything looked easy and seamless, but I know there were many hours of forethought, practice, planning, and flexibility that went into bringing this all together. So you didn't all see the last minute chats and IMs I was sending to Ruby asking her to help me with something, but she handled it all with this just unflappable sort of way. So I'm very grateful for that. Finally, I'd like to just close with 3 thoughts briefly. 3 things that as general themes occurred to me as I listened to the presentations here and as I lurked in the background sometimes or sometimes weighed in as things particular resonated with me. The first is that I really do fundamentally believe that this community, the group of people working with email archives, has advanced incredibly far over the past decade, and in particular over the past 5 years. Email archiving is something that I think is now not just moving out of the fringes, but has become central to what all of us can do and what other repositories can and should be doing as well. It's not just the province of large, national archives, large university programs. And we really have moved to the point where there are a variety of mature technologies and policy frameworks so that regardless of what your specific repository context is, you really can make some immediate progress with providing access to email. Second, this is a space that continues to be filled with technical innovation, experimentation, and evolution. Email's, one of the original internet formats. And in that way, people like to dump on it. I mean, like everybody else, I feel overwhelmed by my email and I see it, as a bit of a burden from time to time. But I can't, help but recognize that the technologies we're applying to email, whether it's emulation, whether it's entity extraction, whether it's advanced database design, whether it's diving deeply into formats, we really are doing some incredibly technically interesting things. And finally, I just, like to reflect that email archiving can and is directly connecting more into our existing systems that we use to provide access to our broader archival collections, and also directly connecting in a deeper and deeper way to our user community, which I think demonstrating use of the collections is the best long-term way to get additional support for and a mandate for email preservation. At the beginning, we heard from Nicole Hemmer, who was our keynote speaker, that from her perspective as a historian, the digital record and email in particular is both impossibly large and frustratingly incomplete. And I think the work we're doing, is addressing both of those issues. So when I think, for example, about the presentation we heard at 2:00 this afternoon from Tori and Lauren, I can't help but kind of endorse their perspective that it's not about the tools you have, but it's what would best serve your users. And I really do hope that and feel that the symposium provided all of us ways to find tools and services that meet our needs, or policy frameworks, training, and other sorts of approaches that we can use to really grapple with email. So as one of the other commenters said, I really like this comment, you don't necessarily need to treat email like a snowflake. It isn't something that can't fit into existing solutions that you have out there. So whether the tool you're using is PDF, a digital asset management system, something like Mailbag, ePad, any of the other solutions we've looked at, or many of the local tools that you've seen, do know that there's something out there and that there are many ways to integrate email acquisition, processing, preservation, and access into your workflows and processes. So those are my thoughts. Nothing, fully earth-shattering here. Just resonating a little bit on the themes that I heard come up throughout the time that we've had together. And again, I would just like to thank all of you so much for being here, and hope that you've learned a lot and that you can stay in touch. Thank you all.